I wrote something really long, and I ended up deciding to just narrow it down and speak from the heart, really. And basically, this is every single situation that I've had to deal with as to me becoming more awakened to actually what's happening in the world and what's happening within myself to date. And it's all about my bubble being burst. So, born in South Africa at the end of apartheid, I really did live in a bubble as a child, as we all do, until the world is revealed to us. My birth name is Botlhale Johannes Dikobe. So many of people cannot pronounce the name Botlhale, or Dikobe comes at a different time because it's actually Dikobe. But the name Johannes is what most people could pronounce. Now, growing up in South Africa at that time, I was the first generation post-apartheid Black person. So the rights that I was awarded post-1990, after Nelson Mandela became president, were not the same rights that my parents were awarded. They weren't the same rights that my grandparents or any other of my family members or ancestors had the chance to dream bigger than their own circumstances, no matter what kind of life they had as a Black person, poor, educated, or whatever. And from that moment in time, I remember growing up and thinking to myself, I don't know why I have so many names, and I also don't understand why no one ever calls me what Johannes is. And when the time came for me to go to school, I was allowed to go to a private school and an interracial school where everybody spoke multiple languages, but not just that, predominantly English. And now growing up in the townships of South Africa, which were basically built as segregation areas for Black people. So the main ones that you would know, or that you would have heard of if you know South African history, would be Soweto, where Nelson Mandela came from and a lot of the freedom fighters came from. And I came from one called Alexandra Township. And my uncle was actually a freedom fighter and was murdered during apartheid. And I learned that later on with age. So that was my first experience coming into the world of, okay, I'm Black and I don't look like everybody else. Now, coming from a continent where I'm a majority in terms of race is something that I'm going to leave here with you right now until I come back to my experience in moving to the US. So I go to school, I'm in a private school, I'm allowed to, interact with people of different races, learn so much, and I'm fascinated by history. So I can be in a classroom and learn about the civil rights movement. I can be in a classroom and learn about slavery, but yet it doesn't resonate with me because I'm an African, I'm a majority race, and I'm born from here. So I don't know what it's like to be a slave. I don't know what it's like to not have that kind of longevity when it comes to an identity. So my bubble gets burst. I moved to the United States. It was a time when Bush was still in power and Barack Obama was about to be president in 2008. I was 17, about to turn 18. The world was my oyster. And I finally felt like I had reached a place in my life where it was no longer just about race or my sexuality. And having come out at the age of 12, my sexuality was not an issue to me at any point. And my bubble was burst when I first read that Nelson Mandela was still considered a terrorist internationally and on the international terrorist watch list, but mainly in the US, until Barack Obama actually changed that. So now all of a sudden I've got questions about my Blackness. I came from a country where streets had been changed, street names had been changed from colonizers, statues had been taken down, and things were renamed so that as Black people, we could feel empowered that whatever happened in our past is something that we don't have to deal with going forward. And now I'm at the end of my teenage years and I'm having to question my Blackness. What a hard thing to do to somebody that is just coming into adulthood. And what a wake-up call as well. But I kept going, focusing on what was going on in my own life, my career. I want to be a dancer. I want to make it. I don't want to go back to South Africa. I've dreamt of something bigger than what was allowed to the generation before me. And I fast forward a few years, and somebody says to me, and a colleague, "Why do you dance so white?" And I don't know what that means, because my training is just, you know, a plie is a plie, a step is a step. We all do the same steps. There's no color to it. And I had to question what it was about me that made that person make that kind of a comment. I've had to question why people have said about me, "Why do you speak so well?" Or if something happens where there's a microaggression comment about a person that is my skin color as a Black person, and I don't react, or I react and it's like, "Oh, well, no offense, because you're not one of them. You speak well, you're educated." What is that? So I would say, ever since moving to America, I've had to re-educate myself, because I'm no longer in a classroom as a child in school in South Africa learning history. I'm no longer in a conversation or a debate, whereas something that is being taught to me is not being lived, because what is happening to the world right now has made all of those questions and more come to light. And in my journey, I have never had to question my race, my history so much. And I think the beautiful thing, as painful as it is for me right now, is having to allow myself to say that after living in this country for almost 12 years, I'm no longer just an African that happens to be in America. I'm an African American. I'm a Black person living in America. But just, if anything else, I'm a Black person who happens to be gay and is Jewish by choice. So I'm compelled to not just educate myself further about the history of this country and the racism in this country and the anti-Semitism and the homophobia in this country, but if not just educating myself, it's time that I speak out about it and call on everybody else that is willing to listen to please take the time to educate yourself on this. Because as Jewish people, the history that we have and the ancestry, and if anything else, the one tribe that's been through it more than anyone else on the face of this earth, we are called upon now more than ever to stand with the Black people and anyone else of color, or anybody else that is told that they're less than, and to help them stand on our shoulders and tell them that this will end. This is the time that this has to end. Shabbat shalom to all of you. And thank you so much for letting me share and giving me this platform.